They say silence means nothing, that if someone doesn't speak, it's because they don't have anything to say. But what if silence is the loudest thing in the room? What if one honest sentence, just one, has the power to unravel years of misunderstanding and force you to face the truth about yourself? I thought I knew why my grandson barely spoke anymore. I was wrong. And the moment I realized it changed how I saw him, how I saw myself, and how I understood every quiet moment I'd ever ignored. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what he said that afternoon still echoes in my life today. Any one tend of the mind. Before we begin, take a second. If stories like this matter to you, if real human moments still move you, please subscribe to the channel. Like the video if you've ever misunderstood someone you loved, and share your thoughts in the comments, because I read them, and these stories live longer when they're shared. And tell me something else first. Where are you watching from right now? Which city, which town, which quiet corner of the world is listening with me? Now let me tell you about a moment I've carried for years. I've only shared this story with a handful of people, not because it was dramatic, not because it was shocking, but because I wasn't sure how to explain it without admitting that I had missed something important, something obvious right in front of me. Maybe that's the point. I'm in my 50s now. I live alone in a small house that creaks when the temperature drops. The kind of house that smells faintly of old paper, lemon polish, and time itself. It's not a fancy place, but it's full. Not just with furniture, but with memories that seem to settle into the walls, as if the house itself remembers things before I do. That afternoon, the light came in low and golden through the living room window. It hovered in the air, catching dust particles that moved slowly, almost deliberately, like they were trying to tell me to pay attention. I didn't know it then, but that light would become part of the memory. My grandson Caleb was sitting across from me on the couch. He was 16 at the time, tall in an awkward way, all elbows and knees, like he hadn't quite grown into himself yet. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his hands folded loosely in his lap. He'd been quiet for a long time by then. Not withdrawn exactly. Not rude. Not distant in a way that caused alarm. Just quiet. The kind of quiet people explain away easily. He's a teenager, they'd say. Boys don't talk much. He'll grow out of it. Kids these days live in their heads. I nodded along every time someone offered an explanation. But deep down, I felt something heavier in his silence. It didn't feel empty. It felt full. That day, he came over after school like he often did, but something was different. He wasn't holding his phone. That alone caught my attention. He sat down slowly, staring at the rug beneath his feet, as if it might offer instructions on what to say next. I went into the kitchen and started making tea, not because I needed it, but because sometimes movement gives courage time to catch up. I could hear the kettle warming, the soft hum filling the space between us. I wanted to give him room. Or maybe I was giving myself time to decide whether I was ready to hear something I couldn't unhear. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice light. I'd learned not to press. He nodded, then shook his head, then sighed a long, deep breath that sounded like it came from somewhere far below the surface. That was the moment. You know the one. The shift. The instant when the air changes and you realize something important is about to happen, even if you don't know what yet. "I don't talk much," he said quietly, still not looking at me. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Each second seemed to land heavier than the last, because when I do, people hear something different than what I mean. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't rush to reassure him. Over the years, I'd learned that hurrying someone's truth is the fastest way to lose it. He told me about school, about how being quiet made teachers assume he was fine, how classmates assumed he was strange, how being invisible and being watched somehow happened at the same time. He didn't sound angry, just tired. And as he spoke, something uncomfortable settled into my chest. I realized I had been part of it, not deliberately, not cruelly, but through assumption. I had filled the gaps of his silence with explanations that made me comfortable. "I didn't know," I said softly. "I know," he replied. And somehow, that was worse. Kinder. More honest. The room felt different after that. Like we'd moved a piece of furniture that had been blocking a window for years. I wasn't looking at a quiet grandson anymore. I was looking at a thoughtful young man who chose his words carefully in a world that didn't always listen. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes weren't accusing. They were hopeful, and that scared me more than anything else. Because hope asks something of you. I didn't have a perfect response. I still don't. But I listened, fully, without planning my next sentence, without trying to fix him, without trying to explain the world away. That afternoon didn't solve everything. It didn't suddenly make him talk more. It didn't turn me into someone wiser overnight. But it cracked something open between us. And once that happens, you can never pretend the silence was empty again. When he left that day, the house felt quieter than before. And somehow fuller at the same time. The days after that afternoon didn't change in ways anyone else would notice. No dramatic conversations. No sudden emotional breakthroughs. No overnight transformation. Caleb still came by once or twice a week. He still spoke carefully, like every word mattered. He still paused before answering, as if weighing the cost of being understood versus being misunderstood again. But I noticed something different. He lingered longer in the doorway before leaving. He sat closer on the couch instead of perching on the edge like he might bolt at any moment. Sometimes, when I spoke, he actually looked at me, not just politely, but attentively. And I realized something humbling. I had spent years worrying about his silence, without ever asking what it was protecting. I started paying attention not just to what he said, but to how he existed in the room, the way his fingers tapped twice against his knee when he was thinking, the way his eyebrows lifted slightly when something mattered more than he wanted to admit, the way his shoulders relaxed when no one rushed him. One evening, rain pressed softly against the windows, steady, patient, the kind of rain that feels like it's listening. I had made soup, the slow kind, the kind that fills a house with warmth before you ever take a bite. We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising between us, the overhead light casting a small circle that made the rest of the room fade away. That's when he surprised me. "Did you ever feel," he asked quietly, "like people decided who you were before you got the chance to explain yourself?" I smiled, though it took effort. "Some questions reach backward without warning. All the time," I said. "Especially as a woman my age. People see the years before they see the person." He nodded, not dramatically, just enough to tell me the answer mattered. So I told him things I hadn't shared in years. Not softened, not dressed up, just honest. I talked about raising his mother, about mistakes I didn't recognize until long after they'd shaped something important, about how silence had followed me, too, in ways I didn't understand until much later. That's when it hit me. Silence doesn't always mean distance. Sometimes it means caution. Sometimes it means respect. Sometimes it means someone is holding more than they know how to carry. When the rain slowed outside, he told me about a notebook he kept hidden in his backpack. Not a diary exactly. Pages filled with thoughts he never said out loud. Questions. Observations. Moments he didn't want to lose. "I don't think I'm quiet," he said after a pause. "I think I'm full." That sentence stayed with me. It still does. In the weeks that followed, I stopped trying to pull words from him. Instead, I made room. And something unexpected happened. When I talked less, he talked more. Not in speeches, not in confessions, but in moments that mattered. A comment about a teacher who surprised him. A memory from childhood he'd never mentioned. A quiet laugh when something landed just right. One afternoon, as we walked slowly through the park near my house, leaves crunching beneath our feet, he said something that made my chest tighten. "I thought you'd be disappointed if you really knew me." I stopped walking. The trees above us were bare and honest. "I'm disappointed," I said carefully, "that I didn't know you sooner." He exhaled like someone who'd been bracing for years. That was when I understood the responsibility of being listened to. It wasn't about fixing his silence. It wasn't about encouraging him to speak more. It was about honoring the courage it took for him to speak at all. By the time winter crept in, my house no longer felt like a place he passed through. It felt like a place he arrived. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was watching him grow up from the sidelines. I felt invited carefully, respectfully into his inner world. One honest sentence at a time. By spring, something between us had settled. Not loudly, not obviously, just firmly. Caleb started coming over without needing a reason. Sometimes he brought a book to show me a passage he liked. Sometimes he sat quietly while I worked on a crossword. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was easy. One Saturday morning, with the sky pale and open, he asked if we could drive out to the old lake at the edge of town. I hadn't been there in years. The road narrowed as we approached. The water was calm in a way that made you lower your voice without thinking. We sat on a weathered bench near the shore. "I used to come here with Mom when I was little," he said. I stopped remembering it for a while. I didn't ask why. I let the moment breathe. After a long pause, he spoke again, steadier this time. He told me how hard it had been to watch adults talk around him instead of to him. How he learned early that listening was safer than interrupting. How staying quiet kept the peace, even when it cost him something inside. I didn't want to be a problem, he said. So I became invisible. That was his honesty. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. I rested my hand near his, not touching unless he chose to close the distance. After a moment, he did. It was a small gesture, but it carried years of trust. "You were never a problem," I said, "and you were never invisible to me. I just didn't know how to look properly." He smiled. A real one, the kind that reaches the eyes. On the drive back, we talked about nothing important at all. Music, school, plans that were still forming. And I realized how rare it is to simply be present without trying to guide the moment somewhere else. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the quiet house, and I thought about how much silence I had misunderstood in my life, my own included. Caleb didn't teach me how to listen. He reminded me why it mattered. Years pass quietly when you're not paying attention. One moment you're worried about a quiet teenager across the couch. The next, you're watching him stand taller, more certain, more at ease in his own skin. He's older now, still careful with his words, still fond of quiet. But it's no longer a shield. It's a choice. We still sit together in the same living room, the same sunlight catching dust in the air, the same clock ticking on the wall. The house hasn't changed much, but I have. I no longer rush to fill the gaps. I no longer assume I know what silence means. Not long ago, he thanked me. For listening, for not pushing, for seeing him when he finally stepped forward. I told him the truth, that he gave me a gift too. He showed me that understanding doesn't come from talking more, but from paying better attention, from staying open, even when it would be easier to explain things away. If there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this. Silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's carrying a story, waiting for the right moment, and the right listener. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life is the courage to hear what hasn't been said yet.